Council. Welcome to the 47th meeting of the Fair Employment and Housing Council. The meeting is being called to order. I'm going to ask my colleague Mario Block, Senior Fair Employment Housing Council, to conduct the roll call.
Chair Sandoval.
Present.
Councilmember Brodsky.
Present.
Councilmember Hong.
Present.
Councilmember Iglesias.
Present.
Director Kish.
Present.
Councilmember Alude.
Present.
Councilmember Scher.
Present.
Councilmember Walensky.
Present.
Thank you, members, for the public joining this particular council meeting. The council meeting is being webcast live via Zoom video conference. The video of this meeting will be available afterwards on the DFEH website and the DFEH YouTube channel. We also have closed captioning available for participants, which you can find at the bottom of the Zoom bar features. If you're having difficulty accessing closed captioning, you can chat with the administrator to resolve this issue. Members of the public might have noticed that you are muted and your video is disabled at this time. However, please be advised that there will be opportunities for you to comment and participate throughout today's meeting as we address each of our agenda items. We also have a number of ways for you to provide your input and comments. Number one, you can email the council at FEHCouncil, COUNCIL, at dfeh.ca.gov. We will be checking this email account throughout the meeting and your comments will be read aloud and considered by the council members. Alternatively, you can also use the Zoom chat feature to send a message directly to the meeting administrator who can read your comment out loud. Or three, if you would like to speak directly rather than through written text, please click raise hand in Zoom or press *9 if you have called in. If you would like to rename yourself in the Zoom list of participants, you can find yourself on the list and click rename in the list of options next to your name. I also would like to welcome department staff members. We would like to acknowledge, of course, Kevin Kish, the director of the department, Adam Romero, DFH's Deputy Director of Executive Programs, Rachel Langston, Senior Fair Employment and Housing Council, as well as Mario Block, Senior Fair Employment and Housing Council, and Becky Monroe, Deputy Director of Strategic Initiatives and External Affairs. I would like to warmly welcome Ms. Monroe as the newest member of the DFEH team, and I would like her to take this time to introduce herself to our fellow council members and to members of the public.
Thank you. I am thrilled to join DFEH at this really critical time in terms of protecting civil rights here in California. I most recently was working with the Biden administration and before that with civil rights organizations in Washington, DC, and prior to that, back with the US Department of Justice. But I am particularly happy to be back because I started my career in legal services in Los Angeles. And so this is an extraordinarily critical time for protecting civil rights, and this is the right council and the right agency to do it. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Welcome. We look forward to continuing to work with you. We've already worked with you on some issues of importance related to hate violence. So welcome again. Our next item on the agenda is to review the agenda. We have copies of the agenda and meeting materials can be accessed at the council's page of the DFEH website. Highlight of today's meetings will include reports from Director Kevin Kish, Deputy Director Adam Romero, and Deputy Director Becky Monroe. We will also have a public workshop and review of the working draft of employment regulations regarding automated decision systems. And then finally, we'll have updates from the council subcommittees. Our first order of business would be a review and approval of the minutes, which are attachment A, minutes from our last council meeting. And I wanted to see if any of our council members have comments or edits regarding the minutes from our last meeting. Okay, seeing none, I would like to see if there are any public comments regarding the minutes.
There are no public comments.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, can I have a motion to adopt the minutes?
So moved.
Okay.
I think I beat you.
Okay.
Councilmember Iglesias.
All right.
Darn.
Who moved? Helen Hong? With a second by Tim Iglesias. Okay, can we get a roll call, please?
Chair Sandoval.
Aye.
Councilmember Brodsky.
Aye.
Councilmember Hong.
Aye.
Councilmember Iglesias.
Aye.
Councilmember Alude.
Aye.
Councilmember Scher,
Aye.
Councilmember Walensky,
Aye.
Great, so that's been approved. Next item is any council member reports. Anything that you would like to speak on, any of the council members?
Let's see. The third edition of the ABA book on the development of affordable housing just came out, and it has substantial coverage of fair housing law. It's about the whole development process, though. So if anyone's interested, it's a good resource for people developing affordable housing, which, as we all know, overlaps with the interest of protecting fair housing rights.
Thank you, council member. Anyone else? Okay, so next agenda item, we'll have a report first from Director Kevin Kish. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair Sandoval. Just a couple of quick things. One, I wanted to thank and congratulate Council Members Shore and Iglesias, who, along with our team, worked on the Fair Housing webinar series to provide information about the new fair housing regulations that this body promulgated and that went into effect on January 1st. More than 2,000 people attended this webinar series, which I think is an amazing testament both to the importance of the regulations and to the work that you all did and letting people know about them. So thank you for that. Speaking of fair housing, April is Fair Housing Month. It has come back around again this year. And if you look at our website shortly, we will be posting a list of the many events that we are participating in for Fair Housing Month, including the fact that we will be releasing within the next month some additional guidance documents, including a guidance document around emotional support animals, companion animals, and the housing context. So keep an eye out for that. The biggest news since our last council meeting relates to DFEH's collection of annual pay data. We are in the second year of pay data collection that the legislature mandated last year. The filing deadline this year is April 1st. That is a week from today. So if you are an employer of 100 or more employees with at least one employee in California, make sure to get your report in. In the meantime, last week, we released the results of last year's pay data collection, which I'm very excited to announce. And I'd like to turn it over to Adam Romero to walk us through that.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to share with you results from last year's pay data collection, and I'm just going to screen share. Great, so this is DFEH's homepage, and I'm starting here just so everyone can navigate to the pay data results. In the top white ribbon, there's a button for pay data reporting, and as Director Kish mentioned, the current collection is ongoing right now with a deadline of April 1st, and for employers who are still working on their reports, there are a variety of resources available on this page to help you understand this obligation and meet the April 1st deadline. But today I'm going to focus on the results from last year's collection, and there's a button here that says Pay Data Reporting Results. And this will take you to a new web page that explains the data collection. And last year we received over 20,000 reports from employers. And the results on this page represent data from 6.3 million California employees. And I won't go into great detail, but what I'll share with you is there are a variety of visualizations to help understand the results. And what we see is that men and women are relatively equally represented among these 6.3 million employees who work for employers with 100 or more employees, but that when you look at actual job categories and the pay that people receive, we see that women tend to be overrepresented in certain job categories, such as administrative support workers, and men tend to be overrepresented among other job categories, such as executives and craft workers. And you can see that on this visualization here. Similarly, we've also collected race and ethnicity information, and you can also see that the 6.3 million employees reported to us reflect the general race and ethnicity of the California adult population. But similarly, again, as you can see in this visualization, there's overrepresentation of certain racial and ethnic groups in certain job categories and underrepresentation in others. And then if you continue going down, there's a variety of ways to look at these data. I just want to highlight a few more, which is that when we look at the actual pay bands, the wage intervals that employees receive, we similarly see an overrepresentation of women, Latinos, and African Americans among those in the lower wage ranges, and white and Asian Californians in the higher wage ranges. And so I invite the council members and the public to spend some time on this page to understand these findings and the workforce in California, and I've just scrolled down to the very bottom of the page, which actually has very detailed tables that you can download to see counts of employees in each of the different categories that I've been describing. And you can also look at aggregate information by industry. So you can look at different sectors of the workforce, as well as look at regional information as well in this third drop down. And I think that's all I want to mention. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. As you can tell, our team has done a lot of work to make this data accessible to folks who are not data scientists in a visual format. And while the findings I don't think are shocking to anybody who is paying attention to our workforce demographics and pay, I think that having the data in this form and visualized in this way helps us put our arms around a problem in a different way than we can when we're just talking about numbers and percentages. So I'm really proud of our team for this work. Thank you, Adam, for walking it through. The next brief part of our department update is about our hate violence initiative, which is really taking off. And I'd like to turn it over to Becky Monroe to give us an update on that effort.
Great, thank you. And I want to start by thanking Councilmember Brodsky and Councilmember Sandoval for their support for this work. We are really building in some ways on the foundation that they helped to build through the hearing on hate violence that the council had in 2020. At this point, we are thrilled to have the opportunity to build California's first statewide hotline resource network. We are calling it right now, thinking of it as California versus Hate, both resource line and network. And we are looking at this opportunity to not only help people identify sort of what their options are through the hotline, if someone is targeted for hate, to recognize that they may be, that they have options both. If they want to refer to law enforcement, we can help them to do that. If they do not feel comfortable doing so, there are other options, and we want to make sure people feel safe calling if that is not the option that they're pursuing. So we are identifying sort of how to connect people with options, how to connect people with resources directly. And those resources, again, may include things like mental health services, may include things like access to economic support, other sort of ways that we can connect people with resources that the state provides and that some of our partners in the community-based organizations around the state provide. And then finally, to help improve the data collection around hate incidents and hate crimes. Many people who follow these issues know that From a government perspective, it is something that we continue to try to improve on in terms of capturing an accurate sense of what the data looks like. We owe so much to community leaders around the state and really around the country in terms of sort of our better understanding of the way that hate is impacting communities across the state. And to that point, we have now, just in the context of developing this network, we've now talked to over 50 law enforcement leaders, community advocates, civil rights leaders, to understand how do we make sure that this network is as culturally competent and language accessible and really focused on the needs of people who are targeted for hate. So really making sure that we're making this as community centered as possible. We are, we do intend to do justice to the fact that advocates and members of the legislature trusted our agency to have this mandate. So we look forward to launching likely later in the summer, and we. I would just say, we continue to welcome input. I will continue to meet with community advocates and organizations and law enforcement officials to make sure that we are doing this in a way that, again, make sure that we center the people who are targeted for hate. So I am looking forward to perhaps getting to meet more of you through this process. And if anyone has questions, I am happy to answer them. Thank you.
I have, first of all, fantastic work. This is really exciting. And again, yeah, thank you very much to Councilman Brodsky and Sandoval for moving it forward. There was conversation about a letter that was going out to law enforcement. Has that happened?
Yeah, that has gone out. There's several letters that have gone out in excess of, I believe, close to 1,000 after today. They have gone out to the offices of city attorneys throughout the state of California, as well as law enforcement agencies, and in addition, offices of the DA. So that has been out under signature of the council, reminding our law enforcement stakeholders that there are other types of remedies, civil remedies, and other resources that are available to individuals who are victims of hate incidents that may not be cognizable under criminal law.
That's great. And then this hotline and resource network sounds fantastic. I'm curious how, I'm sure your budget's really limited, but how you plan to kind of roll it out and sort of get people's attention.
Yeah, we're fortunate in that, there's really been an effort across the state to address hate incidents and hate crimes. So we are working very closely in partnership with many of our colleagues across state governments. So for example, you may not know the state library now has grants that are going out to ethnic media to make sure that people understand how to combat hate. So we'll be working in partnership with them. We will be doing a significant media outreach to make sure people know we'll be doing public campaigns to get the word out about what these options look like and how people can connect with these resources. And I want to emphasize that we are being very careful to recognize that there are some tremendous resources that community-based organizations have put forward. So we are in no way, trying to replace those, but we also recognize as a state, we have an obligation to make sure we're meeting these people who are targeted for hate, filling in gaps where those needs may not be met. And so I think, I was really thrilled that, both Councilmember Brodsky and Sandoval got this letter out so quickly, because I think I have trained, I have both represented people who've been targeted for hate, and I have trained law enforcement agencies across this country. And I can tell you, there are so many times when someone is targeted for hate, it may or may not rise to the level of a crime, but there is still so much pain and fear in a community. And we have this opportunity through DFEH to bring civil claims, but also to connect people to other resources. So I think it's really exciting that they placed this mission within the DFEH to recognize that there are other options for people, and that we can kind of work across the state to make that happen.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you very much. It's great.
Any other comments from council members?
I was just going to say that we're also, although this could be part of our report later, we're also going to be sending the letter to public defenders' offices and other government agencies that may have contact with individuals who are victims. So that work hasn't stopped.
Thank you, council member.
Just another question in terms of, this is amazing. And I'm just so impressed how quickly it's being kind of set up for a state agency. Just for my own edification, so is this a new staffing that DFEH will be staffing this hotline? Because I know you already get like, tens of thousands of calls a year. So just in terms of operationalize and how does this relate to outreach and priorities, just so that I kind of, as a new council member, this just helps me kind of understand how everything connects to one another.
Maybe I can offer a very brief overview of how we got here, and then Becky, you can dive into a few more specifics. So the legislature decided to act, and it was the legislature that said, we are going to authorize $10 million for a statewide hotline. It's going to be housed at and through DFEH. So we are working with a budget, and we are working with the legislature's mandate to implement. What we want to avoid is simply replicating things that have been tried and not worked elsewhere, right? Including the idea that we already have, for lack of a better word, a hotline, in the sense that people can and do call our communication center to say something happened to me and I want to file a complaint. So we don't want to just duplicate that. And so when Becky is describing more than a hotline, she's describing a network of resources that, in our consultation with experts in the state, with community stakeholders, and with people who have tried this across the country in different jurisdictions, is the model that we think has the most chance of actually making a difference in the lives of people who are targeted for hate and in their communities. Yes, there is a budget, there is a legislative mandate, but that leaves really interesting questions like, well, who answers the phone, right? And how is that going to be culturally competent and trauma informed? And how are they going to know everything there is to know to refer people? So Becky, maybe you can spend just a minute talking a little bit about how we're approaching those questions and how we're proposing to set this up.
Absolutely, and I think the two sort of terms that the director used in terms of cultural competence and trauma informed, those are terms that I heard time and time again as I was doing kind of input sessions with community leaders. So here's a few of the ways that we're thinking about this. We will be entering into contracts with organizations that have those direct connections. I mean, one of the things I think is undeniable is if you are confronted with an act of hate, you are more likely going to go to someone who's already earned your trust. So whether that's a local community organization, your church, your mosque, your synagogue, a local LGBTQ center. So we need to make sure that this resource network is a resource not only for individuals, but for communities as well. So we are looking in terms of actual staffing and that sort of thing. We're looking at contracts that would allow us to sort of make sure we're working with people who, again, who have a baseline of trauma-informed practices, who also, understand cultural competency. There is no question that the best person to be sort of on a long-term engagement on these issues would be somebody who has a similar lived experience of some of this trauma. So we are trying to make that happen by working with some of these sort of nonprofits across the state. I mean, that's one of the amazing things about working in California is we have so many resources here. We have so many people who have sort of demonstrated this work. And I think, you can look at entities like Stop AAPI Hate. You can look at, there are organizations that have been really combating hate for generations. I think one of the things we also want to acknowledge, that we do acknowledge through this work, is that we have seen a horrific increase in sort of reporting around hate incidents and hate crimes, but we know this is not new. And so we are trying to also respect that by making sure we're reaching out to organizations that represent people who've been targeted for hate on the basis of race, color, national origin, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, disability, understanding that we need to have those direct contacts with those organizations to make sure that this is done in the best way possible. And I will say, we are looking to launch. We will roll out and we will probably build as we continue to grow. It is, I feel a significant sense of responsibility to the community groups that I've met with to make sure that we do justice to some of what they've been saying around cultural competence in particular. So we are that's how we're aiming to sort of start this process, again, with this foundational understanding that people who are targeted for hate should go to the places where they've earned their trust. And it is my obligation on the part of the state to earn that trust as well. But until we get there, we're going to work with people who've already done that work as well.
May I just ask, Becky, have you reached out to mental health organizations, local chapters, for example, of NAMI, which has a lot of contact with local communities?
I have not talked to NAMI in in my job here. I have worked with them in the past, but I have been talking to some of our colleagues who are working on mental health issues at the state level, including through the California Reducing Disparities Project, which is a really exciting project that focuses on making sure we are getting equal access to mental health care for people, in addressing issues around race, color, national origin, gender identity, sexual orientation, where there's not that kind of equal access. So, but we will certainly be reaching out more, and I think NAMI is a great idea, and we will certainly be working with them.
Yeah.
I also, so I think that I will tell you just from my past experience, one of the #1 things we hear is the need for culturally competent mental health care. And that is, all of that together is something that is a challenge to find, but that we have the opportunity to do.
Yes, and I work with, for example, a chapter, Contra Costa County chapter that I sit
great.
on the board of, and it's a real, the local chapters can be very much activist and very much front and center with their constituency. And so I think it'd be really good to reach out to them.
I completely agree. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you,
Becky,
Councilmember.
this is-
Sure.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was recognizing Councilmember. Sure. Go ahead.
Oh, wonderful to have you on board, Becky. My name is Dara Schur. I'm with Disability Rights California, which is California's protection and advocacy agency. And I don't know if you've connected yet with us. Good, because we are very heavily involved in addressing hate crimes against the disability community. So I'm thrilled that you've engaged with us. We're big, so I don't always know what somebody else in the agency is doing. That's great.
I have, and it was one of the first calls we made. And part of that is also a recognition that hate crimes against people with disabilities often go unreported. And when they are reported, sometimes they are not treated the same way because there are misconceptions about sort of how people can participate in the process. And so I think it is critical. Disability has been covered in California for many years. It's been covered at the federal level, but until we see numbers that reflect, we know people's experience of confronting hate, we know that we have to do a better job of outreach. So that is going to be, and again, this part where I've done this input sessions, these are ongoing, and we are planning to set up an opportunity to hear from people going forward, because we're not going to get it right 100% of the time. So we need to know, if our numbers don't look like we're reaching the communities we need to reach, then we're going to be reaching back out to those sort of advocates and leaders to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So thank you.
Great work. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council members? Thank you very much for the reports from the department. Thank you, Becky and Kevin and Adam. We're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is a public workshop and review of working draft of employment regarding automated decision systems. We have council members Iglesias and Hong who will take the lead on this particular item.
Great, thank you very much. So this is attachment B to the materials that were provided for the meeting. And first, I want to thank the DFEH staff for their amazing help in developing these proposed regulations, especially Rachel Langston and Adam Romero. It's been really great to work with them and really appreciate your help. Second, just as a reminder, the subcommittee was established to consider proposing regulations because of the demonstrated potential for artificial intelligence, including algorithms, to unlawfully discriminate in at least employment and housing contexts. So Helen and I are going to introduce the proposed, in this workshop, what we think of or hope to be the proposed regulations in the following way. First, I'm just going to briefly explain our approach to the proposed regulations, and then Helen will introduce some of the key definitions we're using, and then each of us will briefly comment on how we've included particular provisions in the different sections of the existing employment regulations. And the idea is we're going to do the employment regulations first and then look at the housing regulations after that. So our overall approach in these proposed regulations is to first to provide important definitions that are intended to capture the various ways in which artificial intelligence can be included in the employment context that may lead to discrimination. And then to make clear that FEHA includes such artificial intelligence within its scope of protecting members of protected classes. So in this right now, we're not proposing new liability standards or defenses at this point. So I'll turn it over to Helen to start talking about the definitions.
Thank you. And I do really just want to reiterate, this was a team effort with staff. A real big appreciation to Rachel and to Adam, particularly Rachel, in doing a lot of this work. And so as we talk about the definitions, as you can see, we're trying to be consistent about starting each of the regulations with definitions up front. And so because there are particular areas where there is ambiguity in employment from the original regulations, we really wanted to explain who we're talking about in terms of agent, algorithm, data, and machine learning. And so a lot of these definitions were from the people and the entities that testified at our first public hearing. So where are these actually coming from in terms of the experts on a national level, but then also trying to make them understandable for employers, right? So when I come to this work, I look from it from not only an advocate, but from an employer standpoint. So would I understand what this means? Particularly when we're talking about employment decisions, many of these algorithms and these software applications are not necessarily in-house. They are other companies. And so that's why the agent and the different areas in which we'll talk about later, like employment agency and embedding, are kind of expanded in that way, because the employment spectrum has evolved since these original regulations. And so, when we talk about these definitions, we're not going to go line by line, because this is the first time that we're bringing this up. And so we know that there's a lot here, and really we want to get the input from the council before we put this back out, as well from the community, right? We want to hear about, like, what doesn't make sense? How is this really being applied? Where do you see this not working, and where do you see it? And so we do really want to emphasize that, we're approaching this because we want to hear from people, and not because we already have a set agenda. We're seeing this from where we see that discrimination can take place and how we can protect those that are most likely, from the data we know, are being impacted by discriminated against through these algorithms in the employment market, even before any kind of screening is taking place. Does that help? I don't think I need to go read by line by line with the definitions, but we wanted to explain our approach.
Can I just ask, is this the starting of the 45-day public comment period?
No,
This is just the preliminary.
This is just a
audit.
workshop.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to say, when I read through it, I mean, you guys did an incredible job. It's such a complicated subject matter, and even I could understand it. So Helen, what you were saying, I think you really accomplished. I was really impressed with the definitions, especially in how you also plug them in everywhere. That was really impressive. So any further comments would be just nitpicking, and I don't think that's the time for that. But it was really, really, really great.
Thank you. Thanks. So I just want to spend a little bit more time just sort of indicating briefly where and how we are proposing that the existing regulations be revised to incorporate this issue and these concerns. So I'm just going to briefly highlight how we've included particular provisions in the existing regulations. So in subsection F of section 1109, regarding principles of employment discrimination, we propose to add a provision to clarify that qualification standards, employment tests, automated decision systems, or other selection criteria that screen out or tend to screen out an applicant, employee on the basis of a characteristic protected by the Act are unlawful unless they're job related for the position in question and are consistent with business necessity. And then we have a brief suggestion in the section 1103 regarding record keeping, where we propose to add some language with regard to preservation of records to clarify that all machine learning data is subject to these requirements. And we propose another provision to make it clear that any person who engages in the advertisement, sale, provision, or use of a selection tool is subject to the preservation of records requirements. And then in Article 2, in the particular employment practices, we propose to revise one of the definitions to explicitly include automated decision systems and or machine learning data. And then within that, within section 11016 regarding pre-employment practices, we propose adding language to specifically include automated decision-making systems under the existing regulations regarding recruitment and pre-employment inquiries. And we also propose to add a new subsection regarding applications to clarify that the use or reliance on automated decision systems may constitute discrimination unless an affirmative defense applies. And we offer a brief example in there. And then finally, in this part, in the subsection regarding interviews, we propose a parallel subsection also, which includes a brief example. And then in section 11017 on employee selection, we propose making a minor addition regarding permissible selection devices to implicitly include an automated decision system. And then in section 11017.1 on consideration of criminal history and employment decisions, we're proposing 3 provisions. First, in subsection A, we include a specific reference to the use of automated decision system or machine learning data to clarify that the provisions on this consideration of criminal history apply to those tools as well. Next, in subsection D, regarding employer requirements, if an employer intends to deny an applicant based on the applicant's conviction history after extending a conditional offer of employment, we propose adding a new subsection providing that if employee's decision involves the use of an automated decision system, the employer's required notice to the applicant must include a copy or description of any data or report from the operation of the automated data system and related data and assessment criteria that were used as part of the automated decision system. And we include a proposed provision that the use of an automated decision system without more does not constitute an individualized assessment. And then finally, for my part, in section 11020 on aiding and abetting, we propose revising 3 subsections regarding prohibited practices. Each of these proposed changes clarify that liability for aiding and abetting by assisting a person in unlawful discrimination, soliciting or encouraging a person in unlawful discrimination, or advertising for employment unlawfully includes when this activity includes advertisement, sale, provision, or the use of a selection tool, including but not limited to an automated decision system. So that's trying to kind of show you what we're trying to do in each section. Helen, did you want to continue?
Sure, although this is my first time. I'm not going to be as thorough as Councilmember Iglesias. I don't have his professorial attention for detail, and I was going a little bit more for broad swaths. And so that's my permission for being different than Tim. But I think, as you can see, in terms of the other sections, we try to add similar provisions about screening on protected statuses using the use of AI, right? So in every section when that was included, and part of this is, right, we don't know how AI could be used to test those areas, right? For language or for other areas because they're using gamified or using voice or using other tests. So we just included that in every section. I think what you'll see of note is particularly when we talk about section, excuse me, as we go down, section 11072 for employee selection. we really just made it very clear that qualification standards and tests have to be, are including those that are administrated or part of an AI system. And we wanted to make sure that it was also clear that I think that what you'll see is probably the most, I think will be the most controversial is section 11071, saying that tests that are not necessarily, we're not saying that they are, but tests that are limited using AI that test personality-based questions, including optimism, positive attitudes, personal emotional stability, intensity, or other components, can be an examination that would be prohibited.
That was the one I highlighted in my notes to sit space, especially thank you for including, having many years ago litigated case involving the MMPI, for example. It's very similar to that.
Great.
You know,
So
I think there's good precedent for it.
good, thank you. So I think we're finished with our presentation. So any comments are very welcome, please.
Thank you, Councilmember Iglesias and Hogg. I think Councilmember Scher, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a couple of questions, but first I want to echo the thanks. This is a very complicated and difficult area, and I think this is an amazing draft. I think it's really captures a lot of the problem areas. I'll just raise a couple of big picture questions. One is, a lot of this terminology is very technical, and I think you've done a great job trying to explain it, but I was just wondering, I'll just get a couple questions in and then you can respond. I'll stop talking. And I don't know if you've had the opportunity to actually have people who develop these systems or work with the computer folks involved in helping you understand them, because I think it would be really critical to be using language that not only makes sense to us and the public, but makes sense to the experts who develop these systems. And so I don't know if you've had an opportunity to do that, but I'm hoping you have or will. So I think that's really important. And second, I think you may need some additional testing, because for example, I mean, you may need some additional definitions. One example is I have no idea what gamified testing means. That's a real technical term. I have no idea what that means to a computer developer or to an employer or how to understand it. And I think there's a number of places like that. Another one is looking at 11013C5, where you talk about someone who engages the advertisements. And so I don't know what you mean by engages. But I think that those are the kind of comments you're likely to get in public comments. I don't want to spend too much time on them. The other main point I wanted to make is there's a lot of language that talks about making decisions or acting in a way that something happens. And I don't actually know if computers make decisions. I mean, I think they direct decisions. I don't know what the right word is there. But whatever language you use, I would really encourage you to capture both intentional and disparate impact implications of what's happening in those computer systems. Because I think from the little bit I know, which is just enough to be dangerous and not a lot, some of the biggest harms of these systems is their unanticipated consequences and the disparate impacts they have that nobody intended them to have. And so I would really encourage you as you draft to think in every section where you're talking about, you know, how these systems works. It's not just how are they intended to work or what are they intended to do, but what are the consequences that occur from them? And it wasn't entirely clear to me, and I have to admit, I didn't have a lot of time to read it in depth, but it did seem to me like sometimes that those two paths or those two ways of discriminating weren't effectively captured. So I'm happy to answer questions you have, but those were the things that struck out for me. This is a really difficult and a critical issue, and I'm so glad that these regs are going out.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Helen, do you want to start response, or shall I?
Why don't you start, Tim, and then I'll answer after you.
Okay, thanks very much, Councilmember Sure, for those comments and questions. Yeah, so on the technical terminology, we have had, staff has had some conversations and has done a lot of research. And then we did have a meeting, a Zoom meeting with a group that is working similarly, and we are sharing our definitions with them explicitly for the purpose of doing what you're suggesting, which is to make sure they make sense from a technical standpoint, and that's a kind of an ongoing thing. So yes, on that. And then as far as other definitions, thank you, that's very helpful. We'll sort of look back and try to pull out things that are not going to be common sense, or, you know, a reasonable person might understand right off the bat. And then on the third thing, it's our intention to make it clear that these kinds of discrimination could be brought under either intentional discrimination or disparate effect. And, you know, so we'll make sure that that's clear, but that's certainly our intention.
Yeah, thank you. I did understand it to be your intention, but I do think it needs another look. So thank you.
Councilmember Sure, I think what I was looking at, because oftentimes these are software companies that are HCMs, they're human capital management companies. And so they're not necessarily designers. So I was actually looking at the language of software companies because it's almost like they're piecemeal, but they look at the data that way. And so I think we can look at it two different ways, right? But one from the coding system, but one from like that practical business sense. And so I think we're focusing a little bit more on the business sense, because it's not, those seem like those are the agents themselves or the software company. And so I know what you're saying though, but we did try getting that impact. I think it is a little bit of both. I know that Rachel, we went back and forth kind of making sure that we try to capture that it's the algorithms kind of historical design in terms of funneling candidates versus also recommending for human decision making a cut as well. But if it's not clear, we will make sure that that's done. I know when we talked about it, we were trying to get both in terms of where those decision points are actually being cut. But if it's not clear, we will make sure that is, and we would also obviously love the input from the community as well about what we may be missing. But thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmembers Hong and Iglesias, did you do a survey of other states that may be going down this path and maybe have enacted something that you are envisioning either through regulatory or statutory action, and kind of common definitions that are being used, kind of speaking to what Councilmember Sure is saying, to make sure that there's consistent language that's readily accessible to the reader and understood, and whether or not there's anything at the federal level. I know the EEOC has had several convenings already. Is there kind of a guideline or sense of what terms are to be used with regard to these types of concerns that may present themselves in the workplace or in housing?
I think staff did some amazing research before we even began, and sort of tagged some of those spaces where it's an ongoing thing, as everyone knows, it's really happening fast. We have tried to find if there are you know, models to go after. We didn't find an exact model at this point, but as I said, we're in conversation with groups that have the same intent as we do, and so it's an ongoing thing. But yeah, that's definitely want to do that.
Thank you.
I think Gabriel Sandoval, council member Sandoval, I think it was only New York that has actually developed something that was actually promoted by industry. So it's been a little bit problematic. And interestingly enough, I think there was one jurisdiction that actually legislatively outlawed personality tests as being discriminatory, but a lot of these factors are very nuanced in the different jurisdictions, so nothing that is this broad. But we anticipate, as you said, I think the EOC is trying to come up with something, but that's also pending. But we are talking about other civil rights agencies that are trying to recommend model rules that we have been talking to as well.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other comments from council members?
I'd just like to make one quick comment, and again, to thank the subcommittee and our staff for putting this out for public comment. I think it's an important step forward after our hearing last year. And I just wanted to emphasize how strongly all of the speakers at last year's hearing encouraged us to think of automated decision-making or algorithmic decision-making, not as a new phenomenon, but rather as a new, or in some cases, relatively new mechanism for making the same kinds of decisions that are already covered by the laws that we enforce. And so I want to thank the subcommittee particularly for incorporating that perspective into the draft, which I think I can see, and I would be interested in hearing from public stakeholders, including folks who were speakers at our hearing, about whether that goal is actually accomplished. The goal being to remind folks that all decisions that lead to discriminatory outcomes in the employment context are covered. And we aren't embarking on a new frontier of legal regulation, but rather pooling the different forms that decision-making can take into the existing framework. So thank you.
Thank you for that framing, Kevin. I can tell you that every meeting that we met with, and I do really want to applaud Rachel Langston for really spearheading all this work from DFH staff, that we often came back to feedback from the public hearing in terms of what their feedback was, and going back to their research and seeing what they found, and recognizing a lot of these interactions are even before there's any face-to-face, and how that has multiplied this type of discrimination without any interaction.
Thank you, Councilman. We have a question or comment from Councilmember Walensky and then Councilmember Brodsky. Councilmember Walensky, you're still on mute.
Thank you, Chair Sandoval. So just want to echo all the appreciation and thanks to everyone who participated in last year's hearing, and the subcommittee, and also Rachel and Adam. So just want to echo all that thanks and appreciation. I had a couple of small wordsmithing things that I will not raise now, but one question that I had was, I noticed that in the aiding and abetting section, which is 11020, you use the term limiting, screening out, or otherwise unlawfully discriminating against. And I think all the other sections, both the general prohibition and then the ones on the specific characteristics, say screen out or tend to screen out. And so my question is whether the limiting or otherwise unlawfully discriminating against language might also apply more broadly elsewhere in the regulation.
That's very helpful. Thanks. We'll think about that and come back.
I was just wondering if there's a way that this can be shared directly with the individuals who were your speakers at the hearing. If they're not on a DFEH list, can they?
I can speak to that. It has been shared with those speakers in case they want to offer any sort of comment based on their expertise.
Have they provided comment today? Rachel?
No, but we have heard from a few that they're interested in doing so at some point down the line.
Thank you. Any other
Sandoval, I think, sorry.
Any other council member wants to ask a question or provide a comment? Okay, thank you again. Council members, we're going to open it up for public comment to see if there are any individuals who would like to comment on this agenda item.
We do have a few in the questions in the chat, and also a raised hand, so I'll address the questions first.
Thank you.
Alan Goldstein asks, do the proposed regulatory changes specifically reference the issue of using an algorithm timing the online test? I believe this may lead to excluding people with intellectual and or cognitive disabilities.
I believe yes. I mean, yes, it includes certain, any kind of testing that would tend to exclude or could exclude people based on protected categories.
We also, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We also have a question regarding how and where feedback may be submitted regarding the proposed regulations. And this is M. Pruitt, who states, I am with an HCM provider and we would love to be able to provide some additional feedback.
I think from the department's standpoint, can you recommend what would be best?
So you can send feedback and I'll put it, I think I can type a answer and response. You can send it to the council's email address, which is fehcouncil@dfeh.ca.gov. And there will be a great deal of opportunity for comment. As the subcommittee members mentioned, this is at the very, very early stages. But certainly you can send comments at any time to that email address. Okay, we have another question, a couple of questions. One, can you provide which groups you're working with to develop these regulations? And then two, when does the 45-day comment period commence?
I'd like to answer this question from the perspective of the department. I think that what our staff has done is simply reach out to folks who we know have expertise to get some initial feedback to help guide, but this is an open process. So the fact that this is out here for public comment means that we are welcoming any group's participation into this. Again, this is pre-formal rulemaking, so there is no 45-day comment period coming up or contemplated. Before that would happen, the council would need to introduce a draft for kind of a proposed draft for formal rulemaking, and the council as a whole would need to vote that draft into the rulemaking process. That process itself would involve additional public comment, and then of course, once a draft moves into the formal rulemaking process, then you have the formal rulemaking with public comment that becomes part of the rulemaking file. So right now, the group is simply involved in brainstorming and collecting information, and anything that folks want to provide to the email address or in public comment here at this meeting would be welcomed.
We have another comment from, or a couple of comments from Alice Wing. I'll read them one at a time, or questions. The first is, are the revisions intended to apply to all employment benefits and employment practices, such as compensation and promotion? Or is this change limited to hiring decisions alone?
It's not, go ahead,
yes.
Helen. You go ahead.
It's not limited under section 11017 for employee selection. It includes promotions and transfers. So it's included for the breadth of employment, not just for hiring.
And Ms. Wing's second question, or there's a couple more. One is, will there be an attempt to extend liability exposure to third-party participants in the supply chain via the new definition of agent and the existing language that includes agents in the definition of employer?
Actually, agent wasn't extended. It was actually a different section. We just put it in there so that was easier to follow. I had actually asked that question in terms of, who is a person and what is an agent. So we're not expanding the definition just for ease. We actually just copied and pasted the agent into this section. And so there is no extension of liability. That is the definition of agent. The other sections for like an employment agency in terms of the work. So I don't think there's a broadening of definition. It's just where we've put that for ease so an employer would understand what's being defined. Tim, did I summarize that?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
And Ms. Wing also asked, can the department provide any guidance regarding defenses? I'm happy to respond, and council can too. It's such an early stage at this point that I think that will come much later in the process, because the regulations are currently not even solidified.
Yeah, and at this point, we're not clear whether there will be any new defenses. It's basically business necessity. It's the standard defenses for any, allegation of employment discrimination.
Yes, that's and okay. And then there is also a comment hand that's been raised by Ken Wang. And Ken, you should be invited to unmute now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And good afternoon, committee members and staff. My name is Ken Wang, and I'm the policy associate for the California Employment Lawyers Association. I'm here to comment on the draft modification to the employment regulations. And I would like to first just commend the council and the department's focus on this issue, including the recent public events that's been hosted by the department and the council. We hope this effort to understand, examine, and regulate this technology can be guided by the civil rights principles for hiring assessment technologies, which was published by the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights with a multitude of national civil rights organizations among its signatories. And the principles are that of non-discrimination, job relatedness, notice and explanation, auditing, oversight, and accountability. And the details of those principles can be found on the Leadership Conference's website. And in recent years, as you all know, rapidly evolving technology has fundamentally transformed almost every aspect of our workplace. And this is especially true for hiring, as more and more employers are using data-driven predictive tools to evaluate and screen job candidates. Most of these technological tools are not inherently harmful to the rights of workers and applicants, and some of those tools may even help mitigate human bias. But the proliferation of often unproven, opaque, and insufficiently studied technologies also has significant costs, including exacerbating and entrenching biases based on race, gender, age, ability, and other protected characteristics. So given the accelerating trends of the technological advance, it is imperative that our government agencies quickly develop the capacity to regulate the harmful impacts from the use of these technologies in order to ensure that assessments are truly job related, provide applicants and employees with adequate notice and explanation of employment decisions made with algorithmic decision systems, expand agency capacity to proactively audit certain tools for compliance, and establish adequate accountability mechanisms for applicants and employees. And I'd just like to echo Director Kish's comment about how these algorithmic tools are, merely kind of a new mechanism to make kind of discriminatory decisions. And I think that's very much true. And I think that's why, the pernicious nature of some of the more dangerous technologies is the fact that, we really don't even know how, these tools function. And maybe the employers that are adopting these tools may not know how they function either. So I think a lot of sunlight in this matter is really important. And I think the draft modifications represent a good first step in this direction. We look forward to continuing to engage with the council as this proposal moves forward. And I think I have two specific questions. One is about kind of the general anticipated timeline for the process of adopting these regulations. And the second is a more specific question around the substantive content about why machine learning algorithm and data in particular is singled out for definition. And for example, kind of the retention, documentation preservation requirements singling out kind of machine learning data rather than kind of input data for all algorithmic decision systems in general. So thank you for your time and your focus on this matter.
Thank you, Ms. Wang. Any additional public comment?
One moment. We did get an additional question from Cameron Dimitri. What is the timing before your next step in these regulations? If not a 45-day period during the formal rulemaking? Thank you.
So I think just to respond to, because the timing issue, we don't know yet. We have to come back to and look at these carefully and all that. So we honestly don't know. We haven't met and set forth a timeline, but as Director Kish said, there's several very clear steps about if we were to propose specific regulations, there'd be notification of that. The council would have to approve a draft, move it into regulatory process and all that stuff. So there's a lot to come as far as potential public input.
And let me just add to Councilmember Iglesias really quick, another plug for our listserv. I think probably everybody on this call is already a member of the listserv, but perhaps you have colleagues, clients who would benefit from being on it. You will be informed if you sign up on our website, on the council's website, of every meeting, every action that the council takes. And so nothing will come as a surprise.
And I think the other part of this is, we want to hear the input. So if we get a lot of feedback, then we're going to have to take this back for drafts longer, right? So part of this is that we're not just trying to speed this through. That's why we're bringing it here for a public workshop, because we want to hear from industry, we want to hear from community, we want to hear from advocates, because we're not, trying to just ram it through. We want to hear your input. And based on that, I think we'll have a better sense of what that timing looks like once we kind of get it. Obviously, if we don't hear from you in like 60 days, it's going to be harder than to incorporate that. But Tim and Rachel and I have been meeting almost, several times a month in order to kind of get this out. So I think obviously your input is welcome, knowing that everyone is trying to travel before the next variant comes through, but your comments will be welcome sooner than later.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other comments from the public?
Yes, we have another comment from Alice Wang. Does the department intend that traditional personality / predictive instruments fall within the scope of the regulations, and whether their vendors are to be regarded as "quote unquote" agents if they use some form of algorithm in developing their scores?
Those are issues that we are working within the regulations, and any feedback people have on this, workshop draft is welcome.
Yeah, I would just like to underscore, this is an opportunity for the community, diverse stakeholders to provide input as part of this process before there's a formal rulemaking. So we are actively seeking input from employer associations, civil rights organizations, individuals who have suggestions of how this particular process can move forward. So I wanted to make sure we underscore that once again. We welcome your feedback. Any other public comments?
Give me just a moment. I want to make sure I don't miss anyone.
Okay, Richard.
No, there do not appear to be any further public comments.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Helen Hong and Tim Iglesias, both council members, and Rachel Langston for contributing so much to this process already. Look forward to continuing the conversation with the community and moving forward in this area that is important. So let's move on to our next agenda item. And we have an update from the Reasonable Accommodations for Associational Disability Subcommittee, Council members Dale Brodsky and Councilmember Alude.
Yes. So the subcommittee has met and continues to engage in discussion, and we're also in conversation with the administration concerning potential regulations on reasonable accommodations for associational disabilities.
Thank you, Councilmember.
And Dale, you're welcome to add if you'd like.
Any comments from fellow council members? Okay, any public comment?
We do have a public comment from Noah Lebowitz.
Okay.
And Noah, you should be unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go
Great,
ahead.
thank you. Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, and of course, happy Friday to everyone. My name is Noah Lebowitz, and I'm the founder of the law office of Noah D. Lebowitz based in Berkeley, but I'm here today in my capacity as chair of the California Employment Lawyers Association Fair Employment and Housing Council Regulations Committee. So I've been spearheading CELA's involvement with FEHA regulations since the now defunct Fair Employment and Housing Commission began its review of disability regulations and pregnancy regulations back around 2010. From that point until the present, the Commission and the Council has engaged in what can be fairly characterized as a massive and thorough overhaul of the FEHA employment regulations. And we at CELA have been deeply involved in every step of the way, submitting detailed comments on no fewer than 9 separate sets of rulemaking efforts. And all along, our stated focus has been and continues to be to support the Council's rulemaking efforts with the goal of increasing the clarity of the law, thereby enhancing stakeholders' understanding of their rights and obligations under the FEHA, which will then lead to higher rates of voluntary compliance and reduced rates of litigation. We have also observed the Council's endeavors over the past 12 plus years provide important and substantial assistance to those charged with enforcing FEHA's provisions. The newly promulgated regulations have been cited with favor by numerous appellate courts, relied upon by litigants to ensure judges understand FEHA's sometimes unique nuances, and have been directly imported into jury instructions, enabling jurors to better understand and apply the sometimes tricky portions of FEHA. Now, some 13 months ago, this Council received the public comments in response to its request for public input regarding associational accommodations. And from what I've observed, the interest in the topic was unprecedented. More than 15 separate letters were submitted from stakeholders across the spectrum. One such letter was signed by 16 separate organizations representing the interests of California workers across the state. This letter focused on explaining the sincere need for promulgating regulations on this topic. To be specific, I'd like to draw the Council's attention to the second paragraph of that letter, in which, citing various studies spanning several years, the organizations highlighted the dire situation in which many workers find themselves because of the existing and current lack of clarity on the issue. As the letter wrote, the ability to provide care or assistance to an associated person with a disability often conflicts with an individual's ability to maintain their employment. And without clarification of their right to associational accommodations, many workers throughout California either face termination or believe they have no choice but to leave their employment in order to provide care for a parent, child, loved one, or otherwise associated person with a disability. In another section of the letter, the organizations cited just one example of the dilemmas faced by many workers. As described, in one instance, a young mother explained that her infant son was born with a serious cardiac condition necessitating multiple open heart surgeries. She had exhausted all of her leave under the California Rights Act, and her employer had threatened termination if she continued to request that they work with her so that she could be with her son during his operations and recoveries. Unfortunately, these examples are not unique, rather they are common. As we explained in CELA's more detailed letter, we believe the authority for issuing these regulations exists within the parameters of FEHA. There is real and substantial need for clarity on the issue. The Council has done such good and important work on FEHA's employment regulations, and we urge you to initiate a formal rulemaking process during which all stakeholders' views can be considered and addressed, and we can take important steps towards helping all such stakeholders understand their rights and obligations, increase voluntary compliance, and decrease litigation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very well said.
Any other public comments?
There are no additional public comments.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, council members. We're going to move on to the next agenda item, which is the update from the Criminal History and Employment Regulation Subcommittee. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Councilmember Julie Walensky.
Thank you. The update from our subcommittee is that the proposed regulation and initial statement of reasons are currently under review by the administration.
Thank you,
Anything to add, Chair Sandoval?
Nothing to add. Any council member comments or input? Okay, any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment for this item.
Thank you, Councilmember Walensky. We're going to move on to the next agenda item with regard to update from our government codes, section 11135 regulation subcommittee. We have Council members Dale Brodsky and Councilmember Dara Schur.
Thank you, Chair. This is Dara Schur. The draft of the 11135 regulations is still under review, so there really isn't an update this month.
Okay, thank you, council members. Any input from other council members? Okay, any public comment?
Chair Sandoval, if I can go back to my section, I misspoke about something that was in the algorithm regulations. Can I just correct the record for a moment? Can I go back?
Go right ahead.
The definition of agent actually was expanded. And so I was mistaken for a different part when we talked about person and entity, but agent was expanded to clarify. And so I did want to make that clear. And so that is in the record. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll have additional opportunity for any member of the public who wants to ask additional questions regarding that, because we have another opportunity at the end of this meeting for more public comment. So Rachel, I couldn't hear what you said in terms of if there's any public comment with regard to 11135.
There's no public comment.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll have a update from our subcommittee regarding hate violence with council members Dale, Brodsky, and me. I will just provide information that's already been identified through the prior presentation with Becky Monroe. I want to also be clear in terms of the letters have been sent to 408 law enforcement agencies in California, 58 DA offices, and then another 712 letters will be issued today by the end of the day to city attorneys' offices and as other stakeholders. And then as my colleague Councilmember Brodsky mentioned, we're also going to provide and send a letter out to offices of public defenders throughout the state of California. We also have been meeting with different governmental, with other community stakeholders, for example, LA versus Hate. We also been working with Becky Monroe and Adam Romero and others with regard to the hotline, and look forward to receiving continued input from the public as to what they identify as additional ways we could address this particular issue. Councilmember Brodsky, do you have anything else to add at this time?
I just wanted to thank LA versus Hate for the activism that they have been demonstrating and themselves coming up with a hotline number at some point, and also acknowledging the LA Police Department that has itself issued cards which are given to individuals who are targeted for hate violence that provide resources, and which is a great tool, and one that I think we're hoping that will be expanded its use. But I also want to say that Gabrielle and I have been attending lots of different meetings and different training sessions and webinars, and this is an issue that really around hate violence, especially AAPI hate violence, has really attracted a lot of attention. And I, for example, attended a webinar put on by the LA County Bar Association. And so I'm really pleased that the department and the council are part of this network of all kinds of local organizations that are really trying to bring attention to this issue. So we're in good company.
Agreed. Thank you, Councilmember. Any comments from other council members? Okay, any public comment?
There are no public comments.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next update from the Algorithms and Bias Hearing Subcommittee, who just presented during the workshop, Councilmembers Tim Iglesias and Helen Hong. If there's anything else you'd like to add at this time.
No, we're just gonna take a look at whatever feedback we get and start, revising and looking forward. Thank you.
Great. Any public comment?
There is no public comment for this matter, but we did receive a brief comment regarding to the last matter from Terry Villa McDowell. It says, "Thank you, Chair Sandoval and Commissioner Brodsky, for the shout out to LA versus hate. We appreciate it."
Thank you for what you do, LA versus hate, on this issue.
This is Becky Monroe. I would just echo the gratitude to LA versus hate. They've been incredibly helpful as we've been planning this work. So.
Thank you. Okay, any other public comment? All right. So next up, we have an update from our Housing Regulations Review Subcommittee. That's Council Members Dara Schur and Tim Iglesias.
You want to go ahead, Dara?
Why don't you, Tim, please?
Sure. So we are contemplating doing some cleanup regulations from the housing regulations that have already been issued. And we're in the process of doing research and some drafting on that. So we're, anticipating at some point, bringing it to the council.
Thank you, Council Member. Any comments or feedback from other council members? Okay, any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Okay. Thank you, council members. Next, we have a update from the Unruh Act Subcommittee with Council Members Alude and Council Member Walensky.
What? I think you skipped an agenda item, council member.
Oh, yes, I did. I'm sorry about that. We have an update from Real Estate Lending and Restrictive Covenants Subcommittee. Thank you, Councilmember Iglesias, much appreciated. And we have Councilmember Iglesias and Councilmember Helen Hong.
Helen, do you want to go forward? Okay. So we've been meeting and working with staff on this, and we're contemplating bringing forth some regulations down the line that would integrate FEHC regulations with HUDs on some of these issues. And then we're considering other topics, and the plan is to, at some point, put out a survey to interested parties to get feedback on what would be the key issues to address and what are the problems that are happening right now that it would be valuable to provide some regulation on. Helen, any more? You want to add anything?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you.
Any feedback from council members? Any public comment?
No, there's no public comment.
Okay. We'll move on to the next item, which is the update from the Unruh Subcommittee. And we're back to council members Alude and Walensky.
Thank you, Chair Sandoval. Ours is also one of the newly formed subcommittees, and our subcommittee has met and begun research and discussion to evaluate areas of potential rulemaking and really understand the scope of what may be possible.
Okay. Any other council members like to add, comment, or have questions? Okay. Any public comment?
There's no public comment.
All right, next we're gonna have an update from the Community Education Outreach Subcommittee. That includes Helen Hong and me as well. Councilmember Hong, do you wanna provide some feedback?
Sure. So I think part of Chair Sandoval and I met, and we met with staff for all the other council members. Part of the authority of the council is to conduct hearings, publish, provide community outreach. And so, before we endeavor kind of figuring out how we want to engage, I think the question is there interest of council members to actually do this? I think historically and most recently, the council has been really focused on promulgating regulation, which is a huge priority. But one of the items that, as a new council member for me is, the rulemaking has a lot of, takes a lot of stress from, takes a lot of staff time. So how do we kind of balance what we should be prioritizing for rulemaking along with the staff priorities in terms of need as well as community need, and identifying how and what kind of community outreach may be necessary. But with all that, the question is there interest among the committee to do that, the council to do that? So Gabriel, you said it much more eloquently in our last meeting, so I would also pass it back to you.
But let me just add that the council and the department has had community meetings and outreach events, including the ones focused in the San Joaquin Valley, as well as the Fair Chance Act, hate violence related convening, as well as the algorithms convening as well. So as Helen Hong mentioned, there are other responsibilities and duties in addition to the ones that are focused on rulemaking, and it's not something that is distinguished as being less than, it's equal to. Additional, the council shall also engage in different ways to connect and educate the community and to learn from the community as to what is areas of concerns based on civil rights and related issues. And so I would really like to hear from council members about their view of the council more proactively going out to different regions in California, as well as maybe focusing on more targeted areas if we see a trend in a particular issue covered by civil rights laws. My thought is that we are not just regulatory making entity, but there is real power of convening stakeholders, and it could be done in a way that aligns with other types of goals and purposes of the department, such as the opening of regional offices or working with other stakeholders so that we continue to have and create relationships in other areas of the county, for example, Imperial County or Riverside County, where there may not be a maturation of nonprofit organizations that provide the types of civil rights protections and advocacy as you might find elsewhere, such as in San Francisco, the Bay Area, or in Los Angeles. So I welcome your feedback about the active role of creating these opportunities to interact with the community more directly, hopefully now that there may be some opportunity to do so in person, given the hopeful decline of COVID-19 affecting our ability to connect with the community in person. So any thoughts on that?
I have
Councilor
a question. I think
Yeah.
sort of piggybacks off of Councilmember Hong's question. I'm somewhat curious in terms of staff resources and time in terms of supporting an expansion of the council's outreach efforts.
So as I understand it, they are identifying someone to come in to serve that role, to develop a plan in terms of community outreach. They've been doing community outreach already in different ways, through webinars, through convenings, and the like. So this would be also an inquiry of a standalone kind of responsibility and interest if council members do. So for example, it does not necessarily need to be a convening with all council members. There's also opportunities, for example, for Helen Hong and I to meet with stakeholders in the LA County area, for example, or other types of opportunities in that way. But initially, I'm thinking of having, in conjunction with conversations with Helen Hong and other staff, is there a commitment for a council to have a yearly meeting that is focused on outreach and education to stakeholders who do not show up to these meetings, the ones that we're having here, because they may not be aware of what their rights and responsibilities may be in the housing or employment context. So right now, it's a general question of interest of the council members, whether or not you think that's an important component. It is already in the authority that we have, right? So it's not as if it's something that's new or different. It's just whether or not there is interest as a general matter. Councilmember Walensky? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. So thank you for having this conversation about it and being on the subcommittee to think about these in a targeted way. I'm very interested in participating in outreach events and hope to be able to do so in person if the pandemic situation permits, especially in parts of the state that may not have had council events or meetings previously.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Brodsky?
I guess one question I have is to what end? And I think that, you know, in thinking about holding these hearings wherever they are, I think we need to focus or ask ourselves, what's our end goal? Education may be one that's similar to having webinars and that sort of thing, but I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. To what end? I think there's items of importance. What the department does in terms of enforcement, what the council does in concert with the department can be really focused on the education and learning from community about civil rights laws and compliance. A lot of the challenges that I would say communities may have is, number one, not even knowing that the department exists and what their responsibilities might be in terms of addressing concerns related to discrimination they may face. Number one is just identifying the department as this is what they do, and here's what we do in terms of assisting the regulatory making process. Two is expanding the network of stakeholders who are aware of what we do, that are interested in promoting certain sectors who don't have the resources to address violations of their civil rights in a way that other organizations may have. So when I worked for the Office for Civil Rights in the Department of Education, there was three things we were doing. We were enforcing the law, we were providing guidance, then we were providing technical assistance. And I think there may be a constant need to inform different communities and learn from different communities about what are some of the issues of concerns that they're facing in different areas. And I think to what end, without more, community education and community outreach is significant. If that's the only goal, is to let individuals, but I think we could add on to that particular purpose. For example, as I mentioned, if there's going to be an office that open in Riverside, it would be great to kind of showcase, here's the Riverside office, plus here's what the DFEH does, plus we may learn from stakeholders that there's a particular area of concern that may be in that region or in a particular sector in that region. Councilmember Iglesias, does that answer your question, Councilmember Brodsky? Councilmember Iglesias?
I think Councilmember Scher was before me.
Oh, Councilmember Scher?
I think all of those are very important goals. I am glad you included the last one, because I think as we hear from communities, it will help us prioritize the work that we do in the rulemaking arena. And I think that's a very important way for us to get feedback. There are endless areas for us to regulate further under various laws that we have not touched yet. And I think hearing from communities about what's most important to them is an important function of any such outreach, in addition to all of the other valuable things that you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Iglesias?
Yes, thanks. I also think this is really important part of the council's work. And then part of my thinking is both staff is very busy now, and I think the council members, if we look at all the updates we have to do, there's a lot of subcommittees and we're doing a lot of things already. So one aspect of this is to try to figure out how to be as efficient as possible. And one thing that we have done a little bit, and maybe we could come back to, is when we have council meetings, either online or more particularly if we get to have council meetings in the communities, to just reserve a time in the meeting where we hear from a relevant community member or community group or stakeholder. I know that arranging a whole convening of a whole issue is a lot of work, but we could selectively invite people to present to us, for a 20-minute period in a meeting, and particularly if we're going out to the community, somebody from that community, and ask them to kind of like give us their views. So that's just a small idea, but something that I think we could do that piggybacks on our public meetings anyway.
I appreciate the feedback, Councilman.
We also used to do that all the time. I mean, we used to do that frequently, having guest speakers, which was really great.
Councilmember Hong, you had your hand up.
I think there's two questions that I struggle with. And again, I'm still a very new council member on this body, and a couple of items, right? We know that most people, when they're suffering a violation, do not go to law enforcement or find legal aid, right? They go to trusted friends and organizations. And two, this body is a lot of lawyers. I'm intimidated by this group. Right. I tend to be much more informal because I feel much more comfortable that way. But I think one of the things that I feel is that I'm struggling with is how this body, along with the department, prioritizes just not having enough resources. Right. And I think if we want to say that community outreach and community engagement is important, then we have to then prioritize those resources to reflect that, especially where we think that they're lacking. And so my question is kind of a broader question about how do we pick on the work that we're doing, and how do we make sure it's aligned with the department priorities that I know that can be legislatively given, but then also how we're aligned and prioritizing groups that we don't hear from that are the ones who are suffering, maybe where there isn't a DFEH office. So that's just my perspective.
Any other feedback from council members?
I'll offer just two brief thoughts. One, as most of you know, DFEH has only had funding and positions for education and outreach for the past 3 years. And those were time-limited positions that became permanent, thankfully, to the support of the legislature last July. We did lose our very valued colleague, Brandon Butler, who has left to lead his own group for the County of San Diego in a new enforcement agency. So we very much support him in his new role. But this is an opportunity for us to highlight the fact that we are, in fact, hiring for a permanent executive position for our education and outreach program. And since having this education and outreach function within the department, we have been able to very significantly expand what we can do. And so, for example, just in 2020, we participated in 85 outreach events that reached more than 17,000 Californians. So the work is happening, but when it comes to the council, what you see is what you get. You have the council members, you are volunteers, and you have two attorneys working for DFEH whose counsel and regulatory duties are part of their portfolio, not all of their portfolio. And so that's just the structure that we have right now. But with the new education and outreach executive, hopefully, please forward it's on our website. Please send it to anyone who you know of who might be interested. I think it's an extraordinary job. for somebody who really is committed to these types of actions and values. I want to close by saying that in my experience here, the outreach that has been most effective from the council side has been targeted, meaning you pick a topic and you reach out to the groups that are engaged on that topic. And those are the kind of more general hearings that have been, in my view, the most successful along a lot of different metrics in terms of how many people, the quality of the interaction and the feedback, the utility of the information that we gain from those meetings, and that we are able to provide in those meetings to stakeholders. So I'm thinking particularly of the algorithmic hearing, I'm thinking of the hate crimes hearing, I'm thinking of the criminal history and employment hearing. And so in terms of concrete next steps, one of the things that we can work together on and that I recommend that the council members do is think about the areas of civil rights within our jurisdiction that have not gotten a lot of attention, or that you think more attention should be given to them. And let's identify those areas, and then we identify the folks working in those areas. Then we reach out to them, then we hold a hearing, and we bring in as many stakeholders as we can. And so just in terms of how it would work, I think that's the way that it has worked most successfully during the time that I've been here.
May I ask a follow-up question? I think, Kevin, I think that's really important. And I think I would ask from the department standpoint, where do you think there isn't data or as much attention or complaints or litigate, or, you know, like where there should be? I mean, part of it is, right, in a way, I feel like it's the department data that should be leading us, not the other way around. And so you tell me if that's incorrect. I mean, to me, it should be in conjunction, but I don't want to start something that you don't think is as relevant from a staff perspective or department perspective.
In terms of trends of complaints that you're seeing, those kinds of things.
I think that we can talk about that, although this is an opportunity and I don't want to take up too much more time talking from my perspective. I think there are real limitations to using complaint data for really the exact reasons that Councilmember Hong has identified, which is the most common response to having your civil rights violated is certainly not to turn to the government, right? And so I do think that the case filing trends are of interest. I think they tell us certain things, but I don't think they tell us necessarily what is most important to the communities that we serve, especially if we're trying to reach communities who are least likely to file. But I certainly think that we have a list of things, and I'm looking, I wonder, Adam, if you have any thoughts off the top of your head, and it's perfectly fine if you don't, of topics that we could explore, but this is also something that we can do in subcommittee.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
The other question is, right, like, or geographic, right? Like where it's silent, where we should be saying stuff. Like, to me, it's topic, but also geography, right? Where we know that there are geographies that are under-resourced.
Right. Okay. Adam, do you have anything else to add? You worked with us on these items.
I was just going to add that outside of the employment and housing contexts, the department does not tend to receive as many complaints as we might expect under, you know, in public accommodations or government funded programs. And I think there may be various reasons why we receive fewer complaints in that area, but those could be fruitful topics for outreach and education to make clear that our department receives, investigates, attempts to settle, and prosecutes complaints of harassment that happens at a retail store or at a homeless shelter or in a variety of other spaces where we don't tend to see as many complaints. So I'm interested in understanding that issue and addressing it as it needs to be addressed.
Okay. Any other feedback, council members? Rachel, would you like to add anything on that front?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. You were helpful as well. Okay, so thank you for your feedback. Any public comment?
There are no public comments.
Okay, so we're moving on to the discussion of any additional subcommittee assignments. we have Councilmember Brodsky.
Well, I just wanted to, after we've gone through the whole list of all the subcommittees, it may not be so palatable, but I do think that we need to consider updating our religious creed regulations to cover issues related to a reasonable accommodation, especially in light of COVID. And the EEOC recently came out with their guidance as to COVID. But I think that the regulations, when I reviewed them, are really need to be updated. They're just not up to with the times. And I think it would be helpful to provide guidance to both employers and employees and applicants as to what it means to request a reasonable accommodation. Just for example, if you don't want to be vaxxed and your employer says you have to, where does that come into play? And our regulations don't really address that right now in a way that provide clear guidance. So I'm proposing that we convene a subcommittee to look into amending those regulations. And I don't know if anybody is interested in that, but that's a suggestion.
To kind of in response to Councilmember Hong, this is an area where people have said that more guidance would be very, very welcome in all quarters. So I support Councilmember Brodsky's hesitant request for yet another subcommittee, although I think that it will be relatively targeted and not one of the subcommittees whose work is going to require months of diving into disparate types of subject matter.
The statute is pretty straightforward, and I think it just really needs to be updated. I think it would not be a difficult, or it shouldn't be a, I don't think it'd be a difficult task.
Councilmember, are you identifying yourself as one of the members of the subcommittee?
Not really.
Okay. Does anybody want to be part of this subcommittee?
I will, if it gets to that point, if there aren't people who want to do it, I would, reluctantly, but I would.
So as a process question, then, should some of these other committees kind of be on hold or deprioritized? I want to be really cognizant of like the staffing of these and also priorities, right? If we hear from the department this is needed, then maybe the real estate goes back. I don't know. I'm just trying to be honest and talk in real time because I'm already on 2 committees. I can't do a third, but I also want to be thoughtful of what Californians need.
Helen, do you want to, should we do it together?
Well, then I have to dump Tim on the real estate.
Oh, you wouldn't have to dump them. You could just stay on, what's one more subcommittee?
Well, and I want to give other people, I feel like I've been monopolizing.
Well, that's kind of part of, I've been doing this long enough that if somebody else wants to jump in and do it, they should.
This is the part where our open process becomes extremely uncomfortable because it's kind of like, I would say if there is somebody on the council who definitely would like to do this and has felt reticent stepping forward, now is your moment. And if not, then I think my recommendation would be to form a subcommittee, and then working with staff, we can figure out if another subcommittee's meeting schedule can be reduced in order to accommodate the work.
Councilmember Hong, I think Director Kish has indicated that he is amenable to your suggestion. In terms of prioritization.
Okay, Dale, I'll work with you. If we're the only women standing. Oh wait, Julie, I saw a hand, Julie.
Yeah, I'm also happy to do it. And Helen would echo your concern that we want to be mindful of what Californians need and also the different competing priorities of the department and the council. So if this is an area where it would benefit from rulemaking right now, I'm happy to be on the subcommittee.
Okay, so there's a proposed subcommittee now. Councilmember Walensky and Councilmember Hong? Or
No.
Walensky and
Walensky and Brodsky.
Oh. Okay, it'll be the two skis.
Well, yes.
So
Right.
yes. All right, so do we have a motion to have a new council member, a subcommittee focused specifically on addressing regs as it relates to the COVID-19 implications and accommodations? Do we have a motion on that?
So
I
moved.
And I second, and with
Wait,
great
slightly-
gratitude.
I would like to ask that the motion be to form a subcommittee to study and potentially promulgate regulations around religious discrimination and accommodation, rather than a specific focus on COVID. But thank you.
Yeah.
And can we clarify that we're talking about the employment context at this point, if that's what we're talking about?
In the employment context.
So amended? Okay. And the members would be Councilmember Walensky and Councilmember Brodsky. Do you have a question, Councilmember Walensky?
Oh, sorry. Director Kish just addressed it.
Thank you. All right, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second,
I second with
Great.
great gratitude.
roll call, please. Any objections? See no objections, this motion's approved. Is that acceptable?
Did we need to call roll? I'm sorry.
Not call roll, we're just approving the motion.
Oh, okay.
And it says, see no objection. Adopt. I don't think Mariel's with us anymore, or who is calling?
Oh, she is.
I'm here, sorry. Chair Sandoval,
Aye.
Councilmember Brodsky,
Aye.
Councilmember Hong,
Aye.
Councilmember Iglesias,
Aye.
Director Kish,
I don't vote.
sorry, forgot. Councilmember Alude,
Aye.
Councilmember Scher,
Aye.
Councilmember Walensky.
Aye.
All right, we have another subcommittee. Thank you, Councilmember Walensky and Councilmember Brodsky. Much appreciated. All right, any further public comments?
One moment. There are no public comments on this matter.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the public for attending this council meeting. This meeting is adjourned. It's currently 4:53 p.m. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.